Hello, this is Professor Christian Holscher again. So in today's talk I will present you some clinical trial data testing the diabetes GLP-1 type drugs in people with Parkinson's disease. I've already presented data to show that liraglutide can improve on Alzheimer's disease. So the question is that a specific effect, or is it a more general protective effect of these drugs so that it could protect people from Parkinson's disease as well? And several drugs have already been tested in the clinic. Exenatide, Bydureon, as well as lixisenatide. Both drugs are no longer on the market. They're very old now. In fact, Bydureon was the very first GLP-1 type drug that was brought to the market to treat diabetes. So there was a pilot study that tested exenatide, Bydureon, and it was 45 patients, but it was an open label study, so some people got the drug and others got nothing. So this was 12 months treatment, and then after the trial stopped, they called the patients back in for retesting 12 months later. They also did a cognitive test battery called the MATIS test, which is designed to test cognition in people with Parkinson's disease. And all patients were on the standard drugs that are prescribed for Parkinson's disease, such as L-Dopa. Here are the results. On the left, you see the motor test results, where they do a standard battery of motor tests that's standard for this kind of clinical trial. And you can see that the drug group in red, after 1 year treatment, did not get any worse. And 1 year later, without any drug given, they were still as good as when they started at the very beginning. The control group, however, got increasingly worse, as you expect from this disease. Then on the right side, you see the results of the cognitive tests, and the drug group is in red, and you can see that they did not really change. They didn't get worse after 1 year, and then retesting a year later, they were still at the same level. While blue, they got worse. The blue line, that's the control group. They got worse and worse and worse over time until they got so bad that the test couldn't really show them getting any worse. So we can conclude in this pilot study that the drug effect was quite clear. Even a year later, the drug effect was still there. However, this study didn't have a placebo group, so people were not quite convinced, even though the result is quite clear-cut, and especially in the cognitive test, very clear effect. But people are very skeptical, so the same group that ran this pilot study then ran a phase 2 study. So this is a proper phase 2 study with a placebo control. Drug treatment or placebo was for 7 months, and then 3 months later they called the people back in for testing just to see if the drug effect is still there. Here are the results. So in the standard motor test battery, the drug group did quite well. That's shown in blue. So they stayed basically the same in these tests, maybe even slightly better. And then after drug treatment was stopped, 3 months later, they still showed improvement, and they still were basically the same and the same level as when they started off. The placebo group just got worse and worse, as you would expect. So here with the placebo group, we can see that the drug actually works. It's a proof of concept that people didn't get any worse after the drug was given. And even when stopping the drug, the improvement was still there. This shows that it's not just some temporary effect, as you have with L-Dopa and other drugs. It shows that something in the brain has genuinely changed, and this change is permanent. So there was another phase 2 clinical trial in Parkinson patients. A company called Neurally developed a drug for Parkinson, and it's basically just exenatide. It's like Bydureon. But in order to get a patent protection and in order to keep it in the blood for much longer than the standard exenatide, they added a pagylation, so that's a very large molecule that they connected to the exenatide peptide. So then the drug stays in the blood much longer. However, that also means it doesn't really get into the brain so well. And interestingly enough, in this clinical trial, there was no drug effect, no improvement at all. They actually tested if the drug can enter the brain at all, and you can see here the gray bars show the amount of drug that can enter the brain in mice, wild-type mice, standard mice, and the blue bars tells you how much drug can get into the brains of a transgenic mouse model of Parkinson, which has a leaky blood-brain barrier. So there you can see the drug gets in quite nicely and shows effects, but in the wild-type mouse, the drug does not get in. So this really tells us the drug needs to get into the brain in order to work. There was another phase 2 trial testing the GLP-1 type drug lixisenatide, an older drug that's not on the market anymore. So this was treatment with drug or placebo for 1 year. And then the standard motor tests 1 year later. And we can see that in the drug group, in the standard motor test battery, the scores remained the same. 1 year later, they were as good as when they started off. But in the placebo group, people got worse and worse, as you would expect. So this is very similar to the Bydureon trial result. So this really shows that this class of drug can really work in Parkinson. And another group has actually tested if these drugs can get into the brain. And you can see here they tested a long list of different types of drugs. There's semaglutide, tirzepatide, liraglutide, lixisenatide and exenatide. They're both there. And you can see that lixisenatide gets into the brain and exenatide as well. Not a huge amount, but enough to show an effect. So this is proof that the drugs that get into the brain, they actually work in the clinic. So the blood-brain barrier is very important. You need to get your drug to the target. In pharmacology, that's called target engagement. So it shows that you need to get your drug into the brain. And we will discuss this important issue, the blood-brain barrier, at some other state. A phase 2 trial has started testing semaglutide, Wegovy, Ozempic, but we have to wait for the results to be shown. So watch this space. So in conclusion, the trials that have been conducted really show that GLP-1 type drugs, they can show impressive effect. They can stop Parkinson's disease progression. But the drugs that they tested are old now. We really need newer drugs, and particular drugs that can enter the brain. And the drugs that are on the market at the moment, they don't really enter the brain. They're not designed for that. They stay in the blood to treat diabetes. But we will talk about this in another video. And thank you for watching this little video clip. You can have a look at my personal website for some updates and news. And there's also a ResearchGate website where I have all my scientific publications that you can download for free. And I hope to talk to you soon.